The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters.
Some of the biggest influencers in America are doubling down on this and really do think you're garbage if you disagree with them. We're going to break down the latest insanity from some of the biggest left-wing influencers on the internet, Destiny and Hasan Piker, and so much more. On today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I take on the craziest ideas from across the internet and across our politics, all from an independent perspective. So the context for this story is that Biden's getting dragged right now because of a viral clip in which he appears to suggest that all Trump supporters are trash. Take a listen.
And just the other day, a speaker at his rally called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. Well, let me tell you something. I don't know the Puerto Rican that I know, or Puerto Rico where I'm in my home state of Delaware. They're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. His demonization of things is unconscionable, and it's un-American. It's totally contrary to everything we've done, everything we've been.
So one, they're taking a joke a comedian made as if it was a serious statement made by a serious speaker, which is kind of absurd. Although I do think that Trump shouldn't have had a comedian at his rally. It's just not the right venue, and just weeks before an election, it's not smart. Still, I think it's absurd to take that as if it's a true serious statement when it was a joke by a roast comedian. Secondly, God, I'm just reminded by how decrepit this man is, who's got the nuclear codes. He sounds like he can barely string together a sentence. And to suggest that Trump supporters are all garbage is just a horrible and close-minded sentiment, which is why Biden and his aides are trying to walk this back or clarify and argue that he was actually saying Trump supporters with apostrophe S, referring specifically to that comedian, not all Trump supporters. Here's a clip from MSNBC explaining this line of defense from the White House.
The right have seized that comment to mean his supporters, meaning Donald Trump's supporters, meaning all Trump supporters, half the country, saying the president is calling them garbage. The White House is saying, no, there's an apostrophe there. He's talking about his supporter, meaning the comedian. His comments are unconscionable and un-American. That's the controversy last night. The president took to Twitter soon after the Zoom, tried to clean it up, clarifying that he was not talking about all of the Americans, but it is certainly half the American public. But it is certainly a controversy that the White House and the Harris campaign dealing with today. And as the right tries to make it, we're showing the tweet here from the president. His demonization of Latinos is unconscionable, the president writes. That's all I meant to say. So the president said something, immediately tried to clarify it, Joe, but it's certainly a story on the right who are trying to paint this to be the next basket of deplorables.
I can't reach inside Biden's mind and know what he was truly thinking, or if he was really thinking at all, but I'm deeply skeptical of this very convenient excuse and the way they've put out this transcript trying to twist his words to distort them from the obvious meaning, which is a really close-minded and ignorant and just, I think, offensive statement to insult half the country because they disagree with you politically and say they're garbage. However, like I said, I can't know for sure what he truly meant. Although I will just say the media certainly doesn't parse Trump's words in this kind of defensive manner when he says crazy stuff, which he does do all the time. They just take it at face value. They don't jump through hoops to try to contextualize it so it's actually less bad than what it sounds like. Anyway, though, the more interesting aspect of this story to me was how many left-wing influencers like Destiny and Hasan Piker actually agreed with and doubled down on Biden's original sentiment that all Trump supporters are garbage. Hasan Piker, the super popular left-wing socialist streamer, wrote in a tweet, "I love that Trump can run on using the military against the enemies from within, mass deportation camps, and that immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country, but God forbid someone correctly calls them trash for supporting that shit." So one of the biggest influencers in America literally thinks that people who disagree with him politically are just trash human beings. And he is not alone in this sentiment, because another popular left-wing streamer, Stephen Bonnell, also known as Destiny, basically said the same thing in a tweet. He wrote, "Biden was right when he called them garbage. Hillary was right when she called them deplorables." I mean, you guys know that I'm not a Trump supporter, but I know so many people who are, and I know them to be good people in so many ways and so much more than just who they check off on the ballot at the ballot box every couple of years. So I was really disturbed by this sentiment. I mean, this notion that your fellow Americans are trash or garbage just because they disagree with you politically is incredibly toxic and close-minded, which is why Biden is trying to walk back those comments. It just strips the world of its complexities and its nuances and its shades of gray, and it ignorantly and honestly arrogantly pretends that the issues that divide us aren't complicated enough for good people with good faith to come down on opposite sides. And it flattens people into one-dimensional creatures, which we're not. I mean, there are people of all political persuasions who volunteer at their local soup kitchen, who sacrifice and serve their community in all sorts of different ways, and who treat their neighbors with kindness or do any of the other countless things that we consider making someone a good person. And who they check off at the ballot box every few years is just one small tiny piece of the 1,000-piece puzzle that constitutes who you are as a person. And despite all of his flaws, we can't just pretend there are no good reasons anyone would ever support Trump. Is somebody who struggled to feed their family under the inflation that we saw under the Biden-Harris administration, are they trash for voting for something different? Somebody who one of their loved ones was one of the 13 U.S. service members killed in Biden's disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal that he totally botched, are they just a horrible human being for voting against that administration that caused the death of their loved one? What about somebody whose family member was victimized by an illegal alien who shouldn't have even been in this country but was released under some of the Biden-Harris's policies, a criminal illegal alien who went on to hurt somebody or kill someone? I'm not going to judge the family of those victims for going out there and opposing that administration. Sorry, I'm just not. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're right. You might think they're wrong or misguided or have arguments to make about any of those issues. But simply prioritizing those concerns or the countless others that might draw one towards Trump, rather than the other ones that might understandably make people more sympathetic to Harris, does not make you a bad person at all. To suggest otherwise is just the height of intellectual arrogance. It's to look at your fellow Americans with contempt, not curiosity, and reveal that you have a remarkably closed mind. And that's where I come down on all of this, that what bothers me is not, did Biden say it, did he not? What bothers me is that some of the most influential people on the internet who are responsible for shaping the political thinking of future generations by the millions actually hold such a toxic and close-minded perspective that they may well be passing on. Anyway, that's my take on this story. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I do read the comments and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. Plus, if you leave your comment with a super chat or a super thanks, I'll definitely read it on the next show. And now we gotta talk about another crazy story, because the controversial YouTuber and commentator Candace Owens was just banned from entering a foreign country because of her opinions. Yes, seriously guys, Candace Owens is now banned from entering another first world Western country because the government there doesn't agree with her opinions. Welcome to 2024, I guess. Let's listen to some coverage from Rising over at The Hill.
Australia has just denied far right-wing influencer Candace Owens from coming to the country as part of her planned speaking tour. Australia's Immigration Minister Tony Burke said, quote, Australia's national interest is best served when Candace Owens is somewhere else, from downplaying the impact of the Holocaust with comments about Nazi physician Joseph Mengele, through to claims that Muslims started slavery. Candace Owens has the capacity to incite discord in almost every direction. For context, Owens has long been a controversial figure because of claims she's made about the Jewish, Muslim, and transgender communities.
The Anti-Defamation Commission, who pushed for Owens to be barred in Australia, said the decision was, quote, a victory for truth, for decency, and for the millions of Jewish souls and millions of others whose memory she so shamelessly desecrated. Owens had scheduled a 5-date speaking tour in Australia in November where she planned to hit 5 different cities. Burke's office has confirmed that her visa was denied.
So here's the thing. If you guys follow my content, you'll know that I'm not a fan of Candace Owens, and I've disagreed with her on a number of things and pushed back on some of her more out there claims and takes. But this is batshit insane. The Australian government is blocking a famous political figure from doing a speaking tour there because they don't like her opinions. This is just wrong on so many levels, but the first one I have to point out is how condescending it is to Australians who, if they don't want to hear from Candace Owens, can just not go hear her talk. And even the ones who do hear her talk are not fragile. I mean, they're not these babies and infants, Australian adults who need to be shielded from somebody existing on the same continent or country as them who has an opinion that hurts their fifis. Do they think their constituents and citizens are mental toddlers or something? I mean, if I was an Australian, even though I don't like Candace Owens, I'd be outraged about this in part because I'd feel insulted. I feel like my government is saying I need to be protected from people with mean opinions and bad words as if I'm some emotional wet blanket that just crumples when my fifis get hurt, rather than as a person, as a Jewish person, for example, who's probably experienced a lot and quite resilient, a person who can handle hearing different opinions or tuning them out if I don't want to hear them and going out on and about my life without noticing or without giving them the time of day. It's just so condescending to take this approach. Two, I really question the consistency and just the arbitrary and kind of capricious nature of something like this. What? Some government bureaucrat in the Australian government just gets to decide this, gets to decide who gets to come in and who doesn't based on how much their opinions hurt their feelings? I'm sure all sorts of people come to Australia for talks or events that some people consider offensive. So which opinions are the two offensive ones, the bad ones that have to be banned from entering the country? It's just, it seems totally arbitrary and like a really kind of dangerous and vaguely Orwellian power to give any government official or group of government officials the ability to decide which opinions are beyond the pale and which opinions are too upsetting and hurtful to be aired in public or allowed on their shores. All of it is just something I would never want to trust a government official or politician with at all. Stuff like this also always seems to have a Streisand effect, right? Where it's now making international news that Candace Owens has been barred from Australia, whereas if they just let her go speak at a couple events, I'm sure several hundred people would have attended them or whatever, but now she's going to get, honestly, thousands and thousands of dollars of free publicity from coverage of this that makes her out to be kind of a victim. And in this case, at least, understandably so. So if anything, I mean, a lot of people will see her and look towards her more sympathetically, and she'll gain name recognition and brand awareness. And whenever they try to do this, whenever governments try to like shut down controversial people, it just has this peculiar and kind of ironic habit of often redounding to the opposite effect, to the person's benefit, making them look like, oh, they're a dangerous truth teller who's being suppressed, when in reality, they might just be kind of a crank. Well, when the government is cracking down on them like this, it plays into their narrative that makes them popular in the first place. I just feel like these government officials never have the ability to think more than a single step ahead. I really don't have that much more to say about this story other than that it reminds me how even these Western nations like Australia or the UK, who are so similar to us in so many ways, just don't have the same cultural or systemic protections or appreciation for free speech that I am so happy we do have here in the US. And I really encourage people to not take for granted for even a second. What do you guys think? Do you want Candace Owens banned from entering your country? I know I have viewers and listeners from all around the world, so do let me know in the comments below, and do hit that like button while you're at it. And now it's time for Brad versus TikTok, my daily segment where I take on the craziest ideas from the Clock app.
Pronoun of the day is slug slugs.
Today, this woke white savior is here to educate us about how to avoid being offensive and problematic on Halloween.
My birthday's on Halloween, and I'm also incredibly woke, which makes me uniquely equipped to tell you how to Halloween respectfully. Number 1, don't do blackface.
Okay, I think because of the uniquely nasty history of blackface, like putting on makeup to look like a black person, people probably should steer clear of that one. But she did not stop there.
Number 2, don't try to look like another race or ethnicity. Whether you're dressing as a person or character, don't change your skin tone or facial features. This includes darkening your skin using prosthetic facial features or manipulating your eye or nose shape. You can learn more about colorism and featureism from Dr. Sarah L. Webb at Colorism Healing.
Isn't making yourself look like the person you're trying to be for Halloween kind of the point of a costume or dressing up. But no, if you wear makeup or change your facial appearance, somebody somewhere will be deeply harmed and affected by that somehow. And of course, what would Halloween woke scolding be without mentions of cultural appropriation?
Number 3, avoid cultural appropriation. This one's easy. If the outfit is a representation of a culture that you're not a part of, avoid it, especially if it's just a racist interpretation of another culture. This includes dressing as a stereotype, religious symbols, or traditional regalia. Remember, culture is not a costume.
It can be, though, and culture is literally meant to be shared and intermixed. And this idea that people need to stay in their lane and only do or appear as or present as or dress up as or engage with the music or art or culture of the thing they are ethnically, their DNA says they date back to, is actually closed-minded and regressive, not progressive. Now, obviously, there's a difference between doing like a really offensive caricature of another race or culture. Though, I mean, even then, it's a freaking costume. It's not the end of the world, but I can see why you would say, like, don't do that. But just don't dress up as anything from another culture is actually just really reductionist and backwards thinking. That's the whole point of dressing up, is being something you're not. And we should want people to celebrate each other's cultures and intermix and intermingle, not silo off by racial group and identity in the name of wokeness or being progressive. That's actually the opposite of that.
Number 4, don't be ableist. Disabilities are not costumes. Number 5, don't mock facial differences. Yes, even if you're mimicking a popular character. Wearing prosthetics, mimicking scars, or using eye patches to make your costume scarier is extremely messed up when you consider that there are a wide array of people who have facial differences. Facial differences are not a costume. You can learn more by going to faceequalityinternational.org.
Bruh. So, doing the Harry Potter scar is now a hate crime, apparently. Dressing up as Captain Hook and putting on an eye patch somehow hurts disabled people. Maybe I'm the crazy one, but I imagine that a lot of disabled people are actually remarkably resilient individuals, not weak little snowflakes who need to be sheltered from somebody somewhere wearing a costume that resembles them in any way. And I think the whole premise of this, that imitating something is a form of mockery inherently, is just like not true. Anyway.
Number 6, don't cosplay trauma. Dressing up as someone incarcerated, enslaved, or a survivor of war is unacceptable, and the scariest thing about it is the lack of empathy required to do it.
I'm sorry. Who the fuck elected you, God Queen of Halloween costumes, with the ability to decide what's acceptable for people to dress up as and not? If somebody wants to dress up as a prisoner, so be it. That's not mocking someone else's trauma. What? Also, I think most prisoners probably have bigger problems out there than somebody wearing an orange jumpsuit on Halloween and trick-or-treating. But I'm apparently just a heartless person with no empathy. Or, just a thought, maybe you're a hypersensitive person who hates fun and wants to ruin an innocent holiday with all this fake made-up nonsense and hysterical rules. Ugh. There's only a little bit of this left, thank God.
If you want to Halloween respectfully, you have to be respectful. But I guess you'd have to want to be respectful too. Get creative instead of playing into tired racist tropes and people's real trauma. But I'm not gonna stop you. Just don't be surprised when you get canceled on November 1st.
Smarter in seconds.
Apparently she calls her little series Smarter in Seconds, but I feel like I just got dumber in minutes. That has to be the most fun-killing, soul-crushing, joy-destroying take on Halloween that I've ever seen. I think the whole thing is just nonsense, and that people should, have a little common sense. Don't do anything too crazy, be somewhat respectful, but people can dress up as things that they are not, and not every imitation of something is a mockery of it. And a costume, at the end of the day, is not that big a deal. It is not a trauma. It is not a microaggression. It is not a hate crime. It's not an act of discrimination. It's a freaking costume. These people need to get a grip and stop infantilizing minorities or members of different groups as if they're so fragile and need to be protected from somebody somewhere trick-or-treating in a way that might hurt their feelings if they ever even knew about it, which they probably never would unless people like this made this such a big freaking deal on the internet. Now, I did a little digging into this woman and her other content, and I think some of what she's doing here may be projection or her trying to make up to the woke people for the fact that she herself has apparently worn costumes in the past that she considers problematic, although they're actually not at all. Let's take a listen to this weird struggle session video where she explains how problematic she was by dressing up as a blind character once or something.
So even though I'm the smarter in seconds lady, I too can be problematic. I just don't talk about it because who'd want to tell on themselves? But when one of y'all asked this question, it made me think and want to share a time that I was problematic. One of like 5 times I can count on my hand, but still. Back in 2019, I dressed as Geordi LaForge from Star Trek The Next Generation with this iconic cosplay. LeVar Burton even said it was one of the best cosplays he'd ever seen. Now, canonically in Star Trek The Next Generation, Geordi LaForge is blind and actually based on a disabled fan of the show. As you can see, I wore the visor, and that's okay because it's not a real life accessibility device. What I shouldn't have done, however, was wear gray eye contacts to make myself look blind. That's cringe and not okay. Now, it wasn't the fact that I was wearing eye contacts. You can wear eye contacts of any eye color you want. It was the fact that I was using eye contacts to mimic a disability. That's the problem. That's ableist. Even though that is accurate to the character, it's still problematic. One, it's not how most blind folks' eyes actually even look, and it's also turning blindness into a prop for my costume, which isn't okay. As I said previously, don't be ableist. Disabilities are not costumes. So remember, when it comes to Halloweening respectfully or cosplaying respectfully, if it's related to somebody's inherent trait, whether that's a disability, race, ethnicity, size, etc., don't try to use it as a prop for your costume. The fact is that my cosplay would have been just as cool if I just wore the visor and didn't use the eye contacts. It's definitely a little awkward and embarrassing to admit that I too made a mistake, but I think it's also incredibly important to show you that once you know better, you can do better.
Bruh, she's like flagellating herself with this weird apology cult video, like to the woke people, like, please, I'm better now. But like, she literally didn't do anything wrong. She wore a visor and eye contacts to resemble the character that she was dressing up as, which was blind and had that color of eyes. So she wasn't mimicking a disability to make fun of it or make fun of disabled people. She was trying to look like the fictional character she was dressing up as for Halloween in a way that was like honoring the character. Or maybe I think this was cosplaying, so not even on Halloween. Like, as in, this person is so cool, I want to look like them. There was nothing degrading or negative about it. You've just declared yourself problematic and unintentionally exposed how ridiculous your whole endeavor here is by this ridiculous attempt to apologize for something where you did nothing wrong. She's like, oh, this is ableist to do anything that's associated, to mimic anything associated with a trait about somebody. Why? Why is it inherently hateful or negative or discriminatory? It could be done in a hateful way, but it certainly doesn't have to be. And I think even in the majority of cases, isn't done that way. People are dressing up as something because they want to look like that thing, most of the time because they think it's cool, not because they think it's bad or lame or gross or weird. And at the end of the day, we're just talking about freaking costumes. It's really not that big a deal. And people like this need to get a grip and stop going on the internet trying to ruin everybody else's fun time. What do you guys think of this video? Do you agree with the dumber in minutes lady? Let me know in the comments below, and do hit that like button to reward my suffering through this absolute stupidity. And now, I'll read a few of your comments to wrap up today's show. One person writes, the U.S. Department of Defense states on their website that the preferred method of disposing of a retired flag, one that is worn out and no longer suitable for flying, is to be burned during a flag retirement ceremony. Burning one in an undignified manner is considered desecration, but burning it in a respectful and solemn manner is seen as a tribute to the spirit of our country. If you can't or don't know how to perform the ceremony, many state and government buildings have collection boxes in or outside their buildings. One would think that a former president and current presidential candidate would know that. Yeah, I assume when he's talking about criminalizing flag burning, he doesn't mean that, but that is interesting context. Another person says, so if you switch to tariffs, you'd have to fire half the government workers to really make it work. I don't see that as a problem. Well, Trump couldn't get rid of the income tax without Congress going along with it, and he couldn't massively shrink the government without that either. So I think the most likely scenario is that we'd end up with tariffs and income taxes and still all of the government workers. So that's just the worst of all worlds. Another person writes, yo, Brad, I love listening to you on my commutes to and from work, and sometimes while working. Greetings from Serbia. Well, I won't tell your boss, and thanks so much for tuning in. It's so cool to me how I have listeners and viewers from all across the world. Another person writes, obviously, the conservative was implying that his opponent was speaking radically like a Hamas member. If he had really wanted to imply he wanted him dead, he would have said that he hoped his beeper does go off. But of course, the victim mentality was quick to play. And of course, the other panelists had to act offended on his behalf as they didn't get the meaning. Meanwhile, they forget their virtuous side when talking about Republicans. Yeah, like I said, I thought it was nasty and personal, but I do agree with your point that saying I hope it doesn't go off is actually a little different than saying I hope it does go off. Either way, they made way too much of it, and the double standard is really palpable. But at the same time, maybe don't accuse a Muslim progressive of being a terrorist supporter just because they disagree with you. Like, that is a bad look, and it is nasty and ad hominem. So another person writes, he shouldn't have apologized. Don't apologize. Yeah, unfortunately, the culture we've created really doesn't reward apologizing. So if you do something wrong, unfortunately, your best bet is kind of to double down. And I really don't know that that's a sign of a healthy culture. Another person says, wow, glass houses much? SMH, the meanest people have the weakest feelings. What he said isn't that serious. Have they heard how they themselves talk about Trump supporters? I think they have heard it, but I think there's some cognitive dissonance there, my friend. Another person writes, Brad, they won't let you on CNN. You would come off too reasonable, which would go against their narrative about people on the center right. Yeah, maybe that's it. It might also just be that I'm not a big enough name, or that what they tend to want on cable news is people that will defend a team. They want somebody to represent Team Blue and somebody to represent Team Red. And if you have somebody who's 70 and 30, who will sometimes agree with one team and sometimes criticize it and sometimes disagree with their own team, that kind of nuance doesn't lend itself to the tribal sports-like, red versus blue, team-based approach to this kind of news that they're doing that I think, frankly, is really inflaming tensions and making our country worse. But hey, my door's always open. If they want to have me, I'd be happy to go. All right, everybody. That's it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Please do make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet, and do hit that like button before you go. Plus, comment with your thoughts. I do take the time to read the comments, and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. Plus, if you leave your comment with a super chat or a super thanks, I'll definitely read it on tomorrow's show. And with that, we'll talk again tomorrow.